keep awake. That's not my assumption of what you're saying to yourself while I preach. It's simply the theme of the texts we have today. Keep awake, be alert, be prepared, in short. Jesus says it, Paul says it, and Isaiah alludes to it. Keep awake. These texts are similar to the ones that we have each year as we begin the season of Advent. Always we hear, keep awake. Always we hear about the end of times, which seems a little weird as we enter into this season of preparation. But you see, we're waiting, we're preparing, we're keeping awake, not just for the birth of baby Jesus, but for the coming of Jesus Christ the King. And so these texts allude to that time. Now, Advent is one of my favorite seasons of the year. And it's not just because I get to wear blue, which is my favorite of the liturgical colors. It's because of all the things that Advent means. I love Advent for all the many reasons that it's similar to the season of Lent. Both seasons are times of preparation. Both are times of introspection, of self-reflection. Both are times to think about the ways in which, in our own hearts, in our lives, and in our world, we have pushed Christ to the edges and have not made room for him at the center. I love that time to reflect and think through those things and to try to figure out ways to make room for Christ at the center. But I also like Advent and Lent because they are times of preparation and waiting. Now, I'm not very good at waiting, maybe you are, but both of these seasons remind me of the importance of waiting. And in our text today, when we hear keep awake, it's talking about waiting. Jesus is talking to his disciples and says, keep awake, because the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Keep awake, because I'm coming back. But here we sit 2,000 plus years later, and Christ has not returned. So perhaps it's all the more important for us to hear, keep awake. For the waiting is long, and waiting can be tedious. Waiting can be hard. Waiting can be exhausting. We may want to sit back and rest, but Christ says, keep awake, be alert, be prepared, for I am coming. Advent is a shorter season of waiting than Lent is, but both are times of preparation. In Lent, we prepare for Christ's death and resurrection, and more than that, our own eventual resurrection. And in Advent, we prepare for Christ's coming. Like I said before, not just as the baby in the beautiful Christmas story that we love, but as the King, coming to establish his kingdom on earth as in heaven, for which we pray each week. But I think, at least right now, my favorite thing about both Lent and Advent is that they are countercultural seasons. In fact, in Advent and Lent, as American Christians, it's really the only time that we live counterculturally, simply by our nature as Christians. In the season of Lent, if you go to the store, you'll find Easter has already arrived. While we are preparing, while we are examining ourselves, while we are in the pit of Lent, the world out there is full of chicks and ducks and the Easter bunny and candy and baskets and new life. While we prepare for Christ's death and then resurrection, the world has skipped right over the hard part. In the same way, right now, we are preparing. It's not Christmas. It's Advent. It is a time to get ready. But if you go outside, or if you listen to the radio like I was on the way here today, all you will hear is the joy of the Christmas season, which hasn't started yet. So right now, we live counterculturally. We live differently than what we hear around us, and we prepare. Now, James's favorite movie right now is The Lion King, which I love. If you've ever seen The Lion King, you probably know that the bad guy, Scar, sings a song at one point. He sings a song to his army of hyenas, and he tells them, "Be prepared." And his three kind of leader hyenas dance around and say, "Yeah, we'll be prepared." For what? I think sometimes the season of Advent is like that for us. Christ says, "Be prepared, keep awake, be alert." And we say, yeah, we'll do that. What? What are we preparing for? Are we preparing for a decorated house and a feast and presents? Are we preparing to act like Christmas is the culmination of all that there is? Or are we preparing for something different? In our text today, Jesus tells us what we are preparing for. We are preparing for the Messiah. We are preparing for the Anointed One, and we are preparing for his coming, the celebration of his coming, since that already happened. And we are preparing for his coming again. So we know a little bit of the what is going to happen. But Jesus goes on in the text to say, it's not for you to know. It is not for anyone to know, not even the angels or the Son, when this will happen. We don't know when or where or really even in what way Christ will return. It's not our job to know these things. It's our job to act as if they're happening today. But it's not our job to sit around and try to figure out when and where we will find Christ returning. There are many people, as I'm sure you know, who have tried to figure this out throughout the millennia, and they're always wrong, because it is not for us to know. But more than it not being for us to know when or where, it's not for us to know how. That's not our responsibility either. This passage is one of the passages that's probably most misinterpreted out of the whole Bible. Because here, Jesus says, 2 men will be working in the field, and one will be taken and one left behind. 2 women will be working, making the grain, and one will be taken and one left behind. There's been so much misinterpretation of this text that I know each and every one of you have heard at least one way in which it's been misinterpreted. Probably the most popular series based on these 2 little lines is the Left Behind series. Volumes of books and a whole series of movies have been made on this premise that some are left behind when Christ comes, that some are raptured, taken away, and others are left behind to deal with whatever happens. But right before Jesus says these 2 things, he says, "When the Son of Man comes, it will be like the time of Noah." And in the time of Noah, people were going about their normal business. People were getting married, people were eating, people were drinking, people were sleeping, people were growing crops. They were acting as if the end would never come. And those who were not Noah's family were continuing to act in the sinful manner that had brought God's wrath to begin with. But in Noah's time, those who were left behind were the ones who were deemed worthy. Noah and his family are the only ones left behind, and they have been deemed worthy to help God recreate. So perhaps Jesus is saying something entirely different in this text than how it's been interpreted many times. But I think more than that, he's just reminding us to be prepared. And part of being prepared is listening. Listening for God's voice. Because if the people in Noah's time had heard God, who had talked directly to them, who had spoken through prophets, who had spoken to Noah, who told them, I'm building this boat because God's going to destroy the earth. If the people had been listening, then maybe they would have changed their ways. So maybe what Jesus is saying here is, listen. The best way to prepare is to listen for God. What is God calling you to today? What is God speaking to you in this moment, in this season, in this year? At this time in our culture, it's probably hardest out of the rest of the year to hear God's voice. There's so much other noise going on that it's almost impossible to hear God's voice unless we spend a lot of time working on it. Because if you turn on the radio or the TV, if you walk into the store, if you open a magazine, if you basically do anything, you'll hear one message. You're not good enough. The only way you will be good enough is if you buy. If you buy the biggest tree, if you buy the nicest food, if you buy the priciest gifts for your family and friends, if you buy enough lights and decorations to make your house look better than everyone else's. Buy, because you're not good enough. You'll never be good enough, but you could at least try. When that is the message that is constantly around us, it is so hard to hear God's voice. God, the one who says, you're good enough because I say so. Not because of anything you do or buy or say, but because I have made it so. You're good enough because you are mine. This is the voice which we are called to hear, especially in this time, but always. Maybe that's part of what preparing, being awake and being alert means. Listening for God. And what we are waiting for. We may not have to worry about the where or the when or the how. What we are waiting for comes from a who that we know. What we should be concerned with in terms of Christ's second coming is who it is that comes. For the one who comes is Emmanuel, God with us. God who steps into the world in the most vulnerable way possible. God who sacrifices himself for the sake of the world. God who is the King of kings, the Lord of lords, who is coming again to establish the kingdom on earth as in heaven. Christ who is coming to make a new heaven and a new earth, a place where weeping and sorrow will be no more, where there will be joy eternally. We wait in hope for the one who has fulfilled promises in the past. We wait for the one who promised the Messiah to Israel and then sent the Messiah. And notice how many of God's people miss the coming of the Messiah. Either ignore it, just don't see it, or downright say, no, that can't be it. Maybe this is what Christ is trying to draw our attention to in this season. Promises that are fulfilled by God, even when they are fulfilled in ways that we don't see very well. So what is God speaking to you in this season? What is God saying to you as you prepare for Christ's coming. Christ the Messiah, Christ the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Is God calling you to feed the hungry? Is God calling you to care for the orphan, the widow, the immigrant in this place? Is God calling you to take your weapons of war like the people in Isaiah and turn them into weapons of creation and growth? For what are you preparing? For whom are you preparing? Keep awake. Be prepared. Live in hope. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.